We are all about our possessions. Do you have the newest phone, newest tablet? I have my iPad sitting up here. Do we have the biggest house, the fastest car? Our kids are growing up watching TV and now YouTube commercials. Propaganda that show us many possessions that we want. They often focus on those possessions, especially around holidays, I think. They seem to show more things that the kids and sometimes big kids want. We're going to look at two examples today about rich men in the Bible. Jesus gives us a wonderful example here of what not to do. And I have an Old Testament story that I think will show us the what to do. But first, let's focus on the what not to do. I have a quote. He who dies with the most toys wins. That quote is from a man named Malcolm Forbes. Now that last name should sound familiar. Forbes was the second generation publisher of the Forbes magazine. This magazine was and still is a respected business journal, which meant Forbes had a lot to say about the practices with business. But he had several quotes, and he's been quoted several times, on things about life. And let's look at this quote and how it has to do with our scripture reading from today. So be thinking, he who dies with the most toys wins. Our parable starts out with a brother. He's wanting half of the family's wealth. And Jesus stops him and says, I'm not the judge. But then he turns around and gives us a parable of a rich, greedy man. He refers to him after a fool after tearing down his barn to build bigger ones, so that he may store all of his surplus grain. That man holds everything. He doesn't share anything to those around him. He's telling us in this parable that this man has all he thinks he needs in life. In the scripture, it says, you have plenty of grain laid up for years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. He has the most toys. Well, in this case, grain. And he thinks that's all he needs. Does he win? No. Jesus says he doesn't. Jesus points out that if he dies that night, what's going to happen to the toys or grain in the story? It's certainly going to do him no good. In verse 21, it states, so it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Our call to worship talked about what does it mean to be rich toward God. This man, this rich fool, was not rich toward God. Now, what does that mean exactly? We have several really good examples in the bulletin, but I have an example from the Bible, the Old Testament. My Old Testament story that I want to turn to is Ruth. One of my favorite books of the Bible. But I'm not going to focus on Ruth. I'm going to focus on a rich man that comes into the story in chapter 2. His name is Boaz. For those who are not familiar with the story, up to chapter 2, Ruth has lost her husband, and she is traveling to her mother-in-law's home country, Naomi's country, because Naomi has also lost her husband. So Ruth stays with Naomi to take care of her. When they get there, they have no food. So Ruth goes to the fields to glean. Now, glean means going behind the harvesters and picking up the extra grain that they forgot or they didn't get. This was a common practice then. The poor would go into the fields and glean what was left. I actually looked it up today. There's gleaning projects all over the world where farmers leave extra food. So Boaz walks into his field and he notices this young woman, this stranger he'd never seen before, gleaning and being very careful to do what she was supposed to do. She wasn't going ahead of the harvesters. She was staying behind them. And he took notice and he started asking about her. And the harvesters would tell him, well, this is Naomi's daughter-in-law. This is what happened. So he told them to leave extra food for her. Leave some extra grains behind you so that she may get those. He's a wealthy man. He didn't build bigger barns. He's helping those in need. He sees Ruth's need. He's helping her. In this example, he is making sure others are taken care of. He showed his kindness and generosity to those in need. But Boaz's story doesn't end there. He continues to show generosity. He could have stopped there in the fields, but he continues. He's a kinsman, and he acknowledges the duty of a kinsman as a guardian redeemer, is what they were called in those days, to marry Ruth. But yet he was the second one in line. He wasn't the first. So he promises Ruth, I will go to the one who is the first, and I will ask him to take care of you. And if he does not, then I will. So Boaz does as he promises. The first declines, and Boaz marries Ruth to take care of not only Ruth, but Naomi as well. Boaz is my example of what to do. In Luke, Jesus shows us that no matter what riches we have, if we don't have the richness in God, we have nothing. Boaz shows us the richness in God, the compassion, the generosity that God would show us. What of our possessions can we bring with us when we die? None of our toys or possessions that we collect here can be taken with us. The Egyptians tried. There's still stuff sitting in pyramids. None of those possessions will ever truly make us happy. Yeah, we're going to be happy if we get a new toy at Christmas or a new electronic or a new widescreen TV. But the happiness when God fills you is a different happiness than you will ever feel by getting a possession. It is through the richness of God's love that we show to others that we find the true richness of life. Think back to a time when you have volunteered, and I know many faces in here, I know many of you have volunteered somewhere in this community. Did you receive a blessing in return? I know there's been many occasions when I have received just as many blessings when I was trying to be a blessing to others. We show generosity when we put together the food buckets that are going to Zimbabwe. When we put cleaning buckets together, we are showing the richness of God's love to others. When we give to the food ministry, our 5th Sunday offering, the generosity to the Holston Home for Children, This parable from Jesus is not telling us to be poor so that we may gain the richness of God. No. It's telling us to not focus on those possessions in life. You won't see God if you focus on the big screen TV. As United Methodists, we have a heart for helping others. We have so many organizations. We have UNCOR, United Methodist Women, United Methodist Men, Sunday school classes that take up projects. We have a heart for helping others, showing that richness of God. But we're not asked to give up our worldly goods and live like paupers when we join the church. John Wesley's quote proves this. He says, "Gain all you can. Save all you can. And give all you can." But the gaining we need, we also need to give. The blessings we get, we need to bless others. Now, in that giving, some of us are thinking of money. Money's just one of those ways to give. I saw a lot of giving this past week with our volunteers at Vacation Bible School. They were giving of their time. And oh, how precious is our time. We give time to the food ministry to volunteer. We volunteer to go to school and read with children. We volunteer to go sit with someone at a nursing home. We volunteer to help out at a community dinner. Just making that time to spend with someone who oh so dearly needs your time. Just think about that. Do you know anyone who needs your time? Generosity, the key to finding the richness of God. Boaz has just shown us one of the many examples in the Bible of how to find that richness. But our story doesn't end there. There is always the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey so wisely put it. Some of us will never know the rest of our story and how it actually plays out. Sometimes it's generations later when our story actually plays out and has an ending. Here's the rest of Ruth's story. Ruth had a son. His name is Obed, or was Obed. The generosity of Boaz led to him having a great grandson. His name was David. We know him better as King David. How many of you knew that? Boaz's great-grandson was King David. And we know where King David ends up. Jesus. So Boaz is in the direct line of Jesus. That generosity worked out a long way after that. But the rest of my lesson comes from another book in the Bible, Joshua. Chapters 2 and 6 tells us of a woman with great faithfulness. We learned about her in VBS this week. Her name was Rahab. Rahab hid the spies that were sent to Jericho. They promised that they would not harm her when they came back to destroy the city. But she had to have something hanging from her window. A crimson cord. We made red bookmarks this week to show that faithfulness of Rahab. The crimson cord was hanging from her window. Now we all know the song. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. And he destroyed the city. But the song does not state that one and only one family made it out. They were spared. Rahab's family was spared. And in chapter 6, verse 25, it says, she was spared, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. She was not the wealthiest, but she found richness in God in her actions towards others. The actions that signified by the crimson cord hanging from her window. And God blessed her many times over due to her faithfulness. But that's not the rest of her story either. How many of you know that Rahab had a son? Now, I'm sure there's some of you, not me, that have the lineages in the Bible memorized. Such and such begat such and such begat such and such. Okay? There's a lot of those, especially in Genesis. But Rahab had a son. His name was Boaz. Boaz's mom was the one who saved those spies from being captured, that ultimately led to Jericho's walls tumbling down. And her faithfulness was rewarded many generations later. God has a plan. And God's richness does not end with our death, unlike the possessions we now own. God's richness carries on through eternity. I think of a question posed by a country singer and East Tennessee native, Christian Bush, member of Sugarland, I believe. He has a song that he released last year. It says, "Have you ever seen a hearse with a trailer hitch?" An interesting song. The parable in Luke 12 clearly shows us that it's not the possessions of this world. It's the richness we seek in life. And if our life were to end right now, what has this parable taught? Has it taught us whoever dies with the most toys wins? Or whoever enjoys the richness of God wins? Which do you think wins? Let's pray. Heavenly